A tennis lifer through and through, coming to us from Hong Kong, Peter Johnston, who has been a towering presence in the sport of tennis, and he joins me on the Honest Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, broadcaster on the ATP Challenger Series, and this is going to be a peer not only into the business tennis acumen of one Peter Johnston, but also learn about the lifestyle he has embodied in his upbringing in Australia and get the human side as well. So I'm thrilled to have you on from a guy who goes on a lot of podcasts. I guarantee you, Peter, you will enjoy this and it might be a little bit different in a good way. So thanks for doing this.
Hey Brian, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
You have transitioned from being a professional as far as being on the pro circuit as a player, and now you are working in with Peter Johnston Sports. You're the owner, you are the facilitator of tournaments, you are a one-stop shop, self-described, as far as the resources and the connections and what you have provided the sport post playing. But if you were to look back at your playing career and the way in which you conducted yourself out there, what part of your game, and I know the game has changed a lot over the years as you've now transitioned into the professional side of being an executive, but what part of your playing style on the court has been timeless?
Yeah, well, I was pretty much a journeyman type player. I mean, I played until I was just turned 26. Actually, I finished juniors, and in Australia there wasn't much money, and I went to college. Well, I went to Port Washington Tennis Academy initially because I knew a guy there, an Australian guy who managed it, named Alex Aitchison, who would welcome Australians to go there. And my deal was I could get away, live there, do a little bit of work like sweep the courts and do some stuff like that, and train. And it gave me sort of a pathway to get from Australia and in a cost-effective way. And then that led to I went to college for a little bit and then played the tour for like 6 years before I stopped. But most of my tennis ended up in Europe, and I think that was by necessity because and in Australia, like at that stage, I mean, I grew up in Melbourne where the courts, there was a lot of on-to-car courts, like Shale in the UK. So I did play like kind of a clay court upbringing, but grass was more the thing, and synthetic grass. And so by spending a lot of time in Europe, I don't think it was my natural surface. Like I was a bit of a chip charger, but I think the one thing within my tennis, if that's like what I take from my tennis, is I was always pretty determined. Like I feel like when I would have my wins, and I was journeyman at really, top 200 level. But I was pretty resilient. Like I kind of won a lot of matches, like down when I was down. It was like probably better when I was down because I was a pretty good fighter and pretty persistent. I guess that's one thing that I could take away from my career. But it was, at that stage too, you were battling your way around. Like I think another takeout, Brian, is probably I always treated myself as a business again by necessity. Like I'd play a lot of small tournaments in Europe. I'd have a car and I played club tennis because that was sort of supplementing when I would lose, go back, play a small tournament. In France, they had a lot of those progressive draw tournaments where you could lob in late in the late in the event and just play one or two or three matches. And that was all keeping the dollars turning over. So I kind of took that business approach to myself to keep myself on tour. And I guess that's kind of a something that stayed with me for my professional, if that was kind of professional, but and my executive life.
When you're in one of those cars, and I'm assuming you're renting one back then, you're going from one tournament to the other, perhaps crossing country lines. How much of your time, hands on the wheel, are you thinking about your prior match and what you did or what you didn't do?
Um, yeah, probably a fair amount. I think it's always with tennis, it was the reality of you're not going to win the event every week. And so you could, try and put it behind you. I think it was all about just trying to, like a lot of that was at that time was not just about reflecting on the matches, which you pretty much did yourself because you didn't have the support teams. Although I traveled with different Australian guys. I had my best mate is still a guy named John McCurdy, and we traveled a lot of years together and played played doubles at all the slams, and we still remain lifelong friends. Worked together, but you were more you were often talking looking logistics. Like if you lost, you had to get out of town and find the next tournament. And you back then, it wasn't like you could WhatsApp someone or email them. And so you'd like say you'd go to try and get in a tournament in France, one of these money tournaments. When you'd lost, you're contacting the promoter sometime or the club in a lot of cases, and you were so much um, onto the logistics that you just probably because you were pretty much managing yourself. But I think that also taught me some skills on just to be pretty self-sufficient, ultimately.
With that said, how much of what you're doing now, and a lot of it does involve logistics, is a way to live out what maybe wasn't there resource wise when you were a player, and that now you're channeling in what you missed as a player into the work you do as an executive currently.
Oh, very much so. I mean, in Australia back then too, like I'd even like I was playing I'd gone to the US, as I said, Port Washington, and I played there was two circuits. There was the Penn circuit, which is satellites back then, and the American Express circuit, which was challengers. And I came back or I wrote to Australian Tennis Magazine at the time when I was away saying, come on, Australia, you've got to get some of these tournaments. A lot of us journeymen and women that we're not getting much opportunity. And I remember going in, just made an appointment with Tennis Australia, which back then the Australian Open was outsourced to Tennis Camps of Australia. It wasn't even run by Tennis Australia, but I made an appointment. Guys I knew, like I had a lot of the guys who were sort of on the council and everything of the Tennis Australia and the state body. They were all pretty nice to me over the years. But I had a meeting with them. Like, you must get a satellite. You must, So I kind of saw like how did these tournaments exist, and then thought, how can I try and I think that's what I've done most of my life is try to look at, hey, here's something missing. How can I influence in trying to make it happen?
I noticed that about you. There is a correlation between your experiences as a player and sure, perhaps you would have liked to have been a professional on the court longer, but obviously you worked in tennis after your playing career and had a lot of connections in the sport. But what do you think if your playing career went a different way, for the better or for the not as good as it did, how would that have impacted post playing in your relationship to the sport now?
Well, the key moment I think for any person playing, if whether you're at the really top or sort of where I was mid-range or lower, it's a transition from the on-court. And the key moment for me was definitely like, do I keep going for another couple of years, potentially get a little better, maybe not, maybe a little worse. And then there was an opportunity in Australia to be, excuse me, like it was called the tennis administrator. Dr. John Fraser was the chairman of Tennis Victoria at that stage. He actually got to the semi-finals of Wimbledon in '62. Neil Fraser's brother. He said, "Look, if you want something here, we can get you a gig, some coach the state squads and run some tennis programs." And that was palatable enough for me to not to get out of Europe because I was looking at, well, what do I hang in and so forth. So I think because I had a very robust challenge straight off the circuit, I never kind of um, should I gone longer, a lot shorter? And I always loved. I think one key was to leave the sport with a love for the game. And I still played a heck of a lot. I still play tennis now, but you play a lot of like money tournaments in Australia as well, and those sorts of things. But I think once I got into that role, then I saw I could create like there was no satellite tournaments when I started that job, but there was no mantra to or mandate, if you like, to run a satellite tournament. But I thought we've got to get some in Australia here. We've got to get some in Melbourne. And I knew a guy who his name was John Hardiman. He had a compression sort of uh, line of sports, like armbands and so forth, called Thermoskin. And he sponsored the Victorian Open, which was an ATP event at the time, which is just before I'd stopped. Got to know him a little bit, and I said, look, he goes, look, I'd like to sponsor something. So we created the Thermoskin Victorian satellite circuit, 5 tournaments, and guys like Woodbridge and Stoltenberg and Richard Fromberg, and then Philippoussis came along. But I was able to sort of create something, take them to clubs. So I kind of was able to start creating ideas. And so I've always then started to latch on to that as create an idea, try and find a way to make it happen. I mean, it's hit or miss. I'm not batting 1,000, but you just, I've kept that sort of way forward all my life.
You have reaped the benefits of a lot of the risks that you've taken in doing new things, things that had not been done before. And it's showing itself in the different tournaments that you have organized. And obviously, you are an executive tournament director for a variety of different events. And you work not only in the Asia Pacific part of the world, but whenever your services are needed, you are the owner of Peter Johnston Sports, a consultancy business. You're going to be covering the globe and everything that is going on in the world of tennis. In this relationship, though, I wanted to go hammer further deeper into this. You, the player, signing up for one of your tournaments now. What would that conversation be like? You talking to the player version of yourself and what that's going to look like. Travel, logistics, and everything in the lead up and then come tournament time.
Well, what I do take from it, and I think I always try to make sure that every player at every tournament, like playing qualies, whatever, that they're all treated as well as possible. And I think that's a sort of a legacy of, I know it wasn't easy. And so, I'm always, and I feel like I do well with what level of players I'm able to secure at different events. Like, you know, I've like Kooyong with the exhibition that I do. I thought it was pretty much the strongest men's and women's exhibition in the world. The last time we ran it with Sinner and Rublev, Rune, you know, Andy Murray, all ranked Dominic team, all guys and women. Where even though the women outside top 50 or inside top 50 get fined, so they can't play an EXO, I'd get Andreeva, who was 51, and Danielle Collins, who was 52. So I feel like I'm okay at that with the top level, but I do try to make sure that every player is treated well, that they feel part of it. And I like to really always listen to guys and girls that are transitioning who are not at the top level or who are leaving the game to just be available. Because I could just, it's a cliche, but I know what it's like. So I've tried to carry that sort of respect idea right through in every tournament I've done.
When they talk to you about the tournaments that you are working on, what are the things that you want to hear from them that confirm and validate within you, as you said, that you're putting on a really good tournament and that you're getting positive reviews from them based on your efforts?
Well, that's what is rewarding. You're not, I mean, the way the tournaments are rated too now on the WTA and ATP are through player surveys. So that determines standards, and you get a very critical report from the post event on, your locker rooms were too small, or the transport was slow, or the meals were not enough variety. And I look, WTA, I'm here in Hong Kong now, and the WTA 250 that we had last year, we won the tournament of the year, which I found really rewarding. I mean, the whole team here sort of found it rewarding, but we try to instill, we do a lot of things for free. I mean, if that works. No, but it's I don't mean to. belittle that because it's, if you went there and you're getting the laundries free and the stringing's free and the meals here in Hong Kong, they were crazy how good the player lounge, like we had a company, Cafe Deco, who they would put on, it's paella night and it's this night and it's one time there was champagne and caviar, which I'm not sure you're allowed to do in the player lounge, but the girls then the feedback you were getting from them is, God, this is so cool. And plus the hotel is right next to the courts, so you don't even need transport. And we're downtown, like it's packed Causeway Bay in Hong Kong with shops and restaurants. So you get a joy when you see the players really enjoying it. And we're a WTA 250, so we're not a 1000, but you can walk away. The players, yeah, got to come back there. That's always the aim, to create a great player experience.
How powerful is the player to player experience in terms of they had a good experience at one of your events, and
Mm.
then you might be banking on that player spreading the gospel of how great h- him or her
Yeah.
was treated to where that is a big part of what it takes to get the kind of people in the field for your events.
Brian, absolutely. And look, I'll give you an anecdote. When I went and worked for the WTA in Florida, and I was the senior vice president of operations there. And I went before I started. I went over and had for my interviews, and I knew Larry Scott, who was the CEO at the time. Great operator, Larry. He did a superb job with the WTA. But I was in I was interviewing. He actually the interview was just at a cafe. I was like all pumped in my suit and so forth. And we goes, come on, let's go to this new cafe that's downtown. And but I said, I was telling him, look, I really feel like, because I was doing tournaments in Australia, I was the deputy tournament director at the Australian Open and ran the lead up events, including Adelaide. I oversaw them. And I said, look, I really got a strong tournament director network. And, there's not pretty much all the tournament directors know well. And he goes, that doesn't matter. He said, it's the players we've got to keep happy, because the players they're the mouthpiece, and they're the ones that, and he really instilled that to me right from the beginning, and or re-emphasized that to me, and I've just always kept that top of mind in any thinking that I have.
Coming off of what you just said, the players and you as a player, the idea of when you're out there, even to this day when you're playing, building up the point, organizing the point, what similarities can you find in the way when you're on court, your play style of how you build up a point or organize a point or play certain patterns to how that mindset, that philosophy might parallel what it's like to build up a tournament or organize an event and things like that?
Well, Brian, I would say the key thing, it's always about the next point. It's kind of it's the, and tennis, what a game, where there's not a clock. You've got to finish this thing off. And, you can't you can bank a little bit of goodwill over longevity, but you've got to keep delivering. And, uh, I think that's the message, particularly, a player, like when I do multiple events, a player might play, more than one event that I do, but I don't. I'm wearing a different hat with each one, but there's no guarantee that they will, because you did it at one thing, that they owe you one. No one owes you one. It's a business. So I think sometimes you can think that that may not be the case, but that is the case. And a lot of the dealings also, don't forget the agent's role, which are, because when you're signing players for events, the player, you can have a great relationship with them, that's fine, but it's a relationship, it's a business relationship, and no player, you've got to respect the industry. Like no player really wants to sit down and say, hey, yeah, they don't want to negotiate with you on say a guarantee. You have to engage with the agent and take them with you. And an agent, and I've got good relationships with agents, I think, across all all of the different companies and individuals, but they don't owe you anything either. They know they have a style, and they know you're not. Sometimes that reduces the haggle of pricing because you kind of look. I'll tell you what it is, and just give me back and forth. But I think it's a great business, and I've been lifetime in the business, but also it's a business.
What probably doesn't feel like a business, or maybe I'm wrong. I don't think it would be for you, and I'm pretty certain. I'm 100% certain that being a dad is not the same thing as being somebody in charge of a business. The thought of how you relate to agents is one thing. What's different about the way that that world works for you and you relating to people and how you relate to, say, your daughter, who you pointed out gave you the title that you work not in sport, but in sports because there's a plural to the amount of different sports that you've worked with, not just tennis, but in golf as well.
Well, yeah, that's right. I did one golf tournament which I really quite enjoyed actually. And I like golf. Um, and it was but it was a different world for me. And like I didn't have the player network. I knew what to do from an event side, but then also I didn't to try and do broadcast on an 18-hole golf course is a little different
Yeah.
to doing it on a closed court. These things I hadn't, even though I'd been a lot of years doing things, but I think if you just uh, try and look, obviously, if I like my daughter, yeah, she said when I did my golf tournament, oh, you can justify having an S on sports in your business, and yeah, but it's one thing in my I do find a great thing with the working in the tennis is it is actually there's long times away, but it's been for our family. I've got two daughters in their 20s, and they know they've seen a lot of the world on the basis of where we have to go with the work, and it is one of the beauties of the uh, of the industry. So I guess there's the pure business, but then there's the lifestyle that it can potentially bring.
You were talking about the surveys, the feedback that you directly will get from the players after, say, any event on circuit, including the ones you do. Jokingly, if we were to throw out a survey in a fun manner, in a playful manner, what it would be like being your dad if I threw out the survey to one of your daughters. What are they checking off? What are they doing
What, as a dad?
as a father?
Well, supportive. I mean, they're the things you want to tick, right? Are we having fun together? Are you there for me through thick and thin? I think with my family, with my wife Vanessa, like who just I'm so lucky in a way because she loves to travel. Like in a way, I'm away all the time. We've been on the road for years and years, but I'm kind of the reluctant one. And when we moved to the US, which was quite a big move. Like I'd been the deputy tournament director at the Australian Open and for a lot of years, and I was a bit, and then suddenly we're picking up the family and we're moving to the US, to Florida, where we stayed for 4 years before I went to Beijing for 3 years. But zero hesitation from Vanessa on like, hey, let's go. And I'm thinking, oh God, it's a big move. And actually, after when I formed this business, my own business, like 10 years ago, I did it on the back of having there was the WTA Elite Trophy in Zhuhai, which was the girls ranked 11 to 20. Oh, sorry, 9 to 20, and it was a good event actually. I kind of wish it still stayed on the calendar. It got absorbed now, but then I'd only had the business a couple of months, and IMG would have this player party at the Australian Open. Went along to it, and a couple of people from the ATP came up to me and they go, "Oh, yeah, so what are you doing? You're doing your own business now?" "Yeah, I got this WTA event." And one said, "You don't want to do a tournament in Russia, do you?" And Vanessa, my wife, and I've just felt sick in the stomach, like, because I've taken on doing Zhuhai and a lot of weeks away again. And she goes, "Yeah, he'll do that. he's in, and and it ended up actually it was an ATP 250, which we won Tournament of the Year that year. I mean, they did an extraordinary job in St. Pete. Great people actually, and but I did that for 8 years in Russia, and then sold it ultimately as a kind of an agent to sell it, sold it to Kazakhstan, and but yeah, that was from probably having a supportive family who just go, yeah, let's just go for it.
How often do you let Vanessa know that she deserves a lot of credit and then even more credit than that which is a lot of credit for the way your career has gone about its way?
Well, I probably should let her know more, I guess. But you can never do too much. But
Never.
but it's true, Brian. Look, it is true, and my girls like Francesca and Vivian, they are just like it's let's they get it. It's my Francesca's birthday tomorrow. I think I've missed. She's turning 27. I've missed like about 18 of those, but we've had like 6 or 7 of those in different countries too. So there's been the good and the bad, but everyone gets it, and we're pretty tight team, which is kind of you just wouldn't get many, especially Australia. It's so far, and every trip's a bit of a pain. But they Australians also they're big on the travel. But yeah, you've got to have a lot of. I couldn't be luckier actually, and imagine if my wife had said if I'd had the good meeting with Larry Scott about moving to Florida, she goes, look, got to keep the kids in school here or something. If she said something like that, well, game over, right? So I've never had that as a barrier. So that's enabled me to try and stay hungry with what we try to create.
You've done that, and it's really cool to see how that's all played itself out. And you think about growing up, your own children and the way they grew up in a variety of different places. What was completely different from the way the upbringing that you facilitated of your daughters, and then the way that you grew up and what that environment was like in Australia?
Well, yeah, look, there wasn't a lot of money in the sport. My dad had a men's clothing shop. He was the mayor of the town, um, and but my life revolved around the shop. Like after school, I'd call in there. And to play tennis. What was pretty cool when I played tennis, I played junior tournaments from the time I was like 7 or 8. But because my family had a shop, I'd get the train everywhere, so I really got to know Melbourne really well. And I'd meet guys on the train. We'd play cards on the train and play cards at the tournaments, but that gave some good independence. But it was very much probably destined to be like focused in Melbourne, if you like. And so that's when like I was really looking how to get away, and when that Port Washington idea came up of doing a combination of work and training, I just jumped at it. But I got a bit nervous when I jumped on that. I got to New York, and I stayed nearly a year there. And when I was just turned 18, and that was a big shit. Suddenly I'm in New York, and but that paved the way. Once you kind of had to make a move sometime, and you don't probably realize at the time how significant that was, but that did create kind of a pathway that led to everything else.
Part of that pathway is being comfortable with the uncomfortable outside of your comfort zone. And I think at that young, tender age, that there's a lot of different factors at play that are out of your control
Hmm.
that aren't always the most calming, if you will. But what I do think is important to note here about your own journey is also the importance of, and I would love to hear how much you gauge this as in lockstep with who you are and where you've taken your career, in this idea of being an extrovert and how important that is in being able to do what you've done.
I think the key to, especially when you have your own business or you're trying to make a path in in not just in sports but in any career, is you have to pitch yourself as part of an idea, not as an individual. I don't think I've ever landed anything that just says, "Oh, look, I'm Peter Johnston. How about I'd like this job." I know I'll pitch an idea. I'll say, look, and like so our COVID time, like I was caught a little bit in Australia. I had three tournaments, but Melbourne was in lockdown, and I was really stuck. But then I saw, look, there's some markets in the world that are still playing tennis, and all these other tournaments are on the shelf at the moment. And I also, so let's say, for example, I knew Kazakhstan in Astana was they were still playing, even though they were not playing to crowds, but they had the money. They were desperate to get an event, and I went and Auckland was sitting there, very strict lockdowns. So I went to Auckland and said, "Hey, I can lease this event to you to," and I went to Kazakhstan and said, "Hey, do you guys want to do an event? I can get an event for you, pay the lease fee, and we'll get the approval from the tours." And that led to doing tournament in Kazakhstan. But it was not me if pitching, "Can I work for you, Auckland? Can I work for you, Kazakhstan?" It was all, I've always tried to bring an idea and come in and, as I said at the beginning, I guess try and be a one-stop shop that if you do like this idea, we can I can bring it and execute. And that's what's sustained me, I think.
There's a creativity to how you pitched, which you just said, which is so important. There's also a fearlessness that I'm learning and I'm hearing from you about how you've gone about pushing and pressing different ideas out there, hoping they stick, but then realizing on the other end you don't have all the control, but so many of these things are landing. To be an extrovert, to be fearless, that role in channeling that, you're probably, if we ask Vanessa how fearless is Peter, look, you might smirk, but she's got to say that, yeah, he's definitely there, and that's important too.
I'm a one on one track I'm fearless, on other tracks I'm not. I mean, if I had to, don't ask her about if I can ski or
Okay.
snowboard, or I'm so gutless. But I know what I'm saying, which I think is key, and I actually do say this to a lot of people. Um, if I had to go and say sell, I don't know, screwdrivers somewhere, I don't. I would feel quite introverted on that. I don't, I just feel like the tennis, I can absorb, I can know because I have an innate love of the sport and the machinations of it. I actually enjoy, even though it's frustrating, I enjoy sometimes the politics of it because I know that's where we're trying to get an outcome here, and is there a path for myself? I'm limited in terms of being an extrovert. I'll go hard when I've got an idea. I won't let it go, and I miss a lot as well. But outside of that, I'm not really, I'm not too, too extroverted.
I would love to see you ski at some point because you, as a competitor, I would feel like you can't turn that off. Even while you've devoted all of your life to tennis, if you're going to go skiing, it has to be hard to accept a little bit of humility because you just haven't had time to do it. But to turn off the competition mindset, you as a player, and then you maneuvering the world of competition in putting up events, how hard is it to turn off and turn on? Or how hard is it to turn off competition when it's, as you use the word innate, it's been an innate part of you for so long?
Well, I think competition, first of all, yeah, I am only a tennis player, but if I, I think what I do enjoy about events is you can feel like you have your wins. Like if you sign a player to play your tournament, for example, or you see a full house, or you get good feedback from a player, or we make some good money. There's so many like points which give you satisfaction. And actually, I did quite a lot in player development as well initially. And even in Hong Kong, I helped a little with the player development program. And I like the mentoring and the create the program idea, but you don't get the events are specific. There's a day when they're on, there's a day when they finish, there's a definite result, there's reports like player evaluations, broadcast numbers, sponsor numbers, spectator numbers. So you're getting this constant feedback, and it makes you. I'm competitive in every one of those areas, and even in Australia, I think doing the Kooyong Classic, which is not part of Tennis Australia, the only event in the summer that's not part of Tennis Australia. We've got our own broadcasts, our own sponsors, and I'm pretty motivated, and we get a good player field. I'm pretty motivated to make sure that stands out in Australia.
You talking about the competition that you feel even to this day. And there's a lot of competition when it comes to throwing out different ideas about you talking about the politics of tennis, and there's all these issues, headlining in terms of the how you divvy up prize money the right way, and there's so many things that the sport is trying to tackle. You said that there are times when you would pick and choose when to be vocal. When do you, when there is an issue front and center in the tennis community where you feel like it is imperative, it is most important that you do speak up at a time when tennis is looking for those strong voices?
Yeah, well, I guess Brian, I try to always make sure I'm positive, but I will also and within and I'll do to some degree protecting self-interest, like the events I'm doing, I'll be fearless on trying to protect them, like their dates on the calendar, their prize money levels, what competition. But I've chosen one issue in Australia which I'm trying to be a little more vocal, and that's um, but in a positive way, is that the broadcast of the tours is totally hidden now. Like, US, we've got the tennis channel. Italy's got Super Tennis, Europe, like Eurosport, etc. But tennis in Australia, outside of the four slams, which are on Channel 9 and Stan, which is the streaming service, it's on. You can only find it like the tours, which you think of like the clay court season we've just finished. Monte Carlo, Rome, Madrid, um, Barcelona, just great travelogue of events. You've got to pay 186 Australian dollars to subscribe to that on beIN. So it goes dark. So I'm kind of like to make some noise about that and try and bring it to the forefront, see what I can do about it, which seems to be a little limited, but to try and find a way to get on some mainstream viewing, because I feel like as a Grand Slam, the broadcast, it's crazy, and also our Aussie players are doing pretty well, like probably 10 in the top 110 right at the moment, guys, girls on the improve. So, um, you know, no one's seeing them, so there's also a lag in terms of like no one in Australia would know Jakub Mensik. Guy wins Miami, right? But we didn't see Miami on broadcast except for the purists that paid the $186 in streaming. So I'm trying to sort of elevate that as an issue, but it's in a positive way to just get more, um, uh, I guess, traction for that argument and perhaps find a solution. But in general, I try to always just find solutions and be very positive about the sport.
When it comes to that specific issue that you're talking about, how close do you feel like you are to landing some sort of solution to answer to the vacuum of tennis viewers that are not being privy to this high level tennis?
Well, look up first of all. Yeah, I'm only a one man show within something that's sort of you have two tours, you have broadcasters, and you have rights holders who may take it. Like it's complex, so it's hard to insert yourself. But I've tried to broker an arrangement potentially between beIN and one of the free-to-air networks who show that on their second or third channels for maybe key moments of Indian Wells semis or finals are on go on the mainstream, and the others are not every match. The rest of it's on beIN or something. But I haven't had success. But I try to also get other people aware, because it was only 18 months ago that actually pretty much 70 or 80% of people in Australia would have Foxtel. and streaming's obviously becoming more and more, segmenting the market, if you like. But tennis was on Foxtel, and so you could watch every week. And if I did the tournaments in St. Pete or even in Kazakhstan or China or whatever, people would be able to watch that. And so you'd go into the Kooyong Tennis Club or Royal South Yarra, and on the screens there would be those tournaments would be on. Now they're showing golf because they can't get the the tennis coverage. So it needs some serious attention.
Last question from me, and I feel like we could just keep talking for hours. I'm having an absolute blast here. Peter Johnston is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. So, in investigating this idea of tennis coverage, speaks to something that, and we're talking about solutions and the work that you're doing in order to see tennis on television screens across Australia with more frequency. How does this, in this one predicament that you're working on, how much does this speak on a grander issue or theme in the community of tennis where how often is it where tennis seems to get in the way of tennis and how big you notice that that is a problem as well?
Look, I think so. And we could point specifically on this to the coverage that the US did with TNT of Roland Garros. Rave reviews because they invested in the content. And there was tournaments, I worry that the way the tennis, it's the broadcast, the big growth in tennis at the moment is with the streaming rights, which is really the betting rights. That's what's really driving the quest for data, etc. But I feel like I just like us to be getting on a weekly basis somehow with the broadcast more eyeballs versus taking the narrow streaming money because if you do it too much, it starts to reduce. And also the costs, you know yourself as a broadcaster, as a commentator, like I did the early days, or not that long ago, 8, 9 years ago, I'd do for the international broadcast of say Zhuhai or Shenzhen or well, particularly those two, we'd fly like an international broadcaster in to do the commentary. Now it's all done out of the UK, so you're not. It's not really bringing the full experience to life. And I just love the dollars have to add up. I get why it is where it is, but at some stage, and that's what I'd like to see in Australia, investment in the year-round presentation of the sport, which is, I think otherwise we're going to shrink actually. And the slams do get their exposure and more power to them, but on a weekly basis, the tour has to tell its story globally a lot better.
Well said. There's this instant gratification of, hey, if I'm going to put tennis out there, I better get the right amount of ad dollars right away. But habits take sometimes time to build that audience. So, in the respect of what we're talking about, I think maybe sometimes there's this fear, and I'm just speaking for myself, if tennis is seen more often on television, that it has to hit a quota right away, ad dollars and number of people that are tuning in. And if not, then that is a deterrent from keeping it on as much as it needs to be in a national audience weekly, as I'm sure that you know all too well.
No, Brian, and you're totally right. And what I would say, particularly, and that's what's refreshing up here in mainland China and Hong Kong, like really, it's so accessible to tennis in China, or either on iQIYI or Tencent or Youku, which is the equivalent of YouTube, and people can watch on their phones 3 and 4 courts in a row. They're at any one time of Berlin on this week or Queens, and they've got room to comment on the broadcast. Like you see all the writing coming in of people commenting all the time. That's what the growth is. That's why, and yet I find it's shrinking. It's certainly the exposure for the sport is shrinking in Australia, as big as the AO is, and look, and January is. It's the 12 months that needs the fleshing out.
What isn't shrinking is your investment in the sport of tennis. Your tennis tentacles are only expanding as the days go on. Peter Johnston, so much fun. I'm Bryan Fenley. What a fun time. Thanks for doing this.
Brian, my pleasure. Great to talk to you.